Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is all about NATASHA DENONA's brand new Sunrise palette. I'm very, very excited about this palette. I have been playing with it and spoiler alert, I'm loving it. It is really, really beautiful. So what we're going to be doing today is just kind of talking about the palette. I'll give you a close-up of the actual shadows. We'll be doing some swatches. I'll be doing a demo on this eye look, and then I'll be doing some comparison swatches. So I'll be comparing it to the Viseart Warm and Rosé Edit palettes, and then I'll be comparing this to the Sunset and Lila palettes from NATASHA DENONA. So that'll be at the very end. I'll have timestamps down below if you want to skip around, skip ahead, feel free. So I'll have that listed down below in the description box. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the particulars of this palette, I purchased this off of Beautylish. It's available, I believe, on Beautylish, on the Sephora site, and also on NATASHA DENONA's site. And I think it's already available in store at Sephora and at the NATASHA DENONA boutique. So this palette is $65. I'm just comparing it to the Sunset palette, which I have here, and it is 15 times 2.5 grams, which is about 37.5 grams in total. And this has 19.25 grams. So this is actually a little bit more than half, and it's just a little bit more than half price. The shelf life is 24 months. It's made in Italy, and there's 3 different finishes in here: the metallic, the creamy matte, and the duochrome. So here's a close look at the packaging. The packaging is very similar to like the Safari and the Biba palettes. It's a hard plastic case, and then on the back you'll see pinholes where you can pop out the shadows if you would like. And then inside we have a nice great big mirror, and we have our 15 shades. So I just wanted to flash up here just a size comparison between this and her larger 15 pan eyeshadow palette. So I just have this sitting on top of the Safari palette, and you can see that yes, it's smaller than the Safari palette, but it's not like half the size. This is actually a very nicely sized palette. I think I prefer this size just simply in terms of like handling. It's just really, really nice in the hand, and I have very small hands. It's easy to carry. I can hold it very easily if I want to use the mirror. So I'm a really, really big fan of this new size. At first I was annoyed, I admit. I was a little bit annoyed because I kept thinking, oh, like I have another size to deal with. Like I like when things look really uniform, especially when I put them away, when I'm trying to organize my makeup. But I really, really like this size, and I hope she kind of continues down the road of this size versus the other 15, because this is great. So let's go ahead and take a look at the swatches. So like I had mentioned, we have 3 different finishes. We have 5 metallic shades, 7 of her creamy matte shades, and 3 of her duochrome shades. All right, so here is a close-up of her shades. First we have Poppy, which is a metallic shade. Then we have Citrine, which is a creamy matte. We have Phlox, which is a metallic shade. Awakening, which is a duochrome, and Laurel or Laurel, this is a metallic shade. Next we have Aster, which is a duochrome. Glory, which is a creamy matte. Azalea, which is a duochrome. Morgan, which is a creamy matte. Agate, which is a metallic. Clove, which is a creamy matte. Carnelian, which is a creamy matte. Jasper, which is also a creamy matte. Morning, which is also a creamy matte. And Dayspring, which is a metallic. All 15 of these shades are brand new, so none of these are repeats. You will not have seen these before in NATASHA DENONA palettes. And I also think this palette is not limited edition. I have not seen that it is limited edition anywhere. No one has specified, so I'm assuming that it's not limited edition. So I decided to do like a soft peachy look. I was actually inspired by one of NATASHA DENONA's videos that she just put out on her YouTube channel on this palette. I just thought it was so, so pretty. I don't know if I achieved what she achieved in her video. Her eye looked much more ethereal. I think she used much more of this lighter shade. But anyway, I thought I would do like a softer look because when I reviewed the Viseart palettes, I did, you know, a much more colorful look, at least colorful for me. So I thought I would tone it down a little bit. But when I did get this palette in the mail and I ripped it open, I did play around with the brighter colors, and they're all absolutely beautiful. They all like blended onto my eyelids like so easily, so perfectly. I'm absolutely loving this palette. I think the only shade that I did not actually play around with is Phlox. I played around with Poppy, and I just never got around to playing around with Phlox, which is much more red. Poppy has like a pinker tone to it. They're all so beautiful. But before I launch into a full review, if you are interested, let's go ahead and dive into the demo of this look right now. All right, so I'm doing something I never do, which is my eye makeup before the rest of my face. So I'm actually going to start with some eyeshadow primer, and mainly because since I have no makeup down, I just feel like my lids could use a little bit of coverage, and this is the tinted smudge proof eyeshadow base from NARS, and I have it in the shade Light, and I really like to use this because it has that additional coverage. So I'm just going to blend that little bit in with my fingers. And I really like this eyeshadow base. I'm not in the habit of using an eyeshadow base all the time, but this is definitely the one that I reach for when I do want to use one. So I'm going to start with my Sonia G Blender Pro brush, and I'm going to go into the Morgan shade, which is this matte peach color. I'm going to work that into my socket line. That blended seamlessly. Next, I'm going to take my Sonia G Builder Pro brush. I'm going to go into Morning, which is like an orangey peachy kind of shade. It's lighter than Morgan, so I'm going to use this again the way NATASHA DENONA does in her video, and she uses this basically to kind of transition Morgan into the model's skin tone. So I'm going to do the same. I'm going to take this Blender Pro brush again, which pretty much doesn't have any shadow left on it, and just kind of run it between the two colors and really blend them together. Oh, good. It's time for me to trim those eyebrows again. Okay, next, I think she uses Azalea. She uses some kind of shimmery shade with her finger, and I think she applies that like to the center of the lid and to the outer corner area. Well, I'm using her as inspiration, so I'm just gonna do what I think is best. So I'm gonna use my finger. This is one of the shades that I feel like is a little bit crumbly, but I'm going to press this onto the lid. I have a little bit of fallout that's kind of like sitting on top of my eyelashes, so that is good. I don't see anything actually underneath my eyes. And then next I'm going to take this Laurel shade. It's like a really pretty kind of like champagne metallic shade. I'm going to use my finger again. I just wiped off my ring finger here. Yeah, it looks pretty clean. So I'm going to go into Laurel, and I'm going to press this onto the rest of my lid. That is such a pretty shade. This Laurel by itself doesn't really have a peachy sheen to it. It's a gold, but once I put it next to this Azalea, it seems like it's picking it up, and it's starting to take on kind of like a peachy appearance. So pretty. Okay, I'm going to take my Sonia G Smudger 1 brush. I'm going to go back into Laurel, and I'm going to add this to the inner corners and around my lower lash line. Oop. Actually, I should not have added that to my lower lash line because I still have to put the rest of my makeup on. So I'm just going to do my inner corners here. And then finally, I'm just going to go in with my Blender Pro brush from Sonia G again and just kind of run it across the top here of that Azalea shade and make sure it's blending into those matte shades that I had put down first. Kind of soften it up a little bit. All right, so there's the eyeshadow done for this soft peachy look. I'm gonna go ahead and finish up my makeup, and I will come back to do comparison swatches. So I'll be right back. All right, so I've finished up the rest of my makeup. It is really weird to do your foundation after your eyeshadow if you're not used to that, for sure. I'm like, how do people get it like, I don't know, like your eyeshadow's around your eyes in such a like light way that I don't know how you're supposed to like kind of blend your foundation into it. So I feel like my makeup looks really weird right around here. Anyway, I did want to finish up my eye look now that I have the rest of my makeup on. I wanted to add a little bit to my lower lash line and also line my eyes. I realized I didn't like really line my eyes, and I think I could probably use this clove color. I think this is dark enough to actually line my eyes. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna start by adding that Laurel color again, since that's where I left off, to the inner portion of my lower lash line. Then I'm going to take my trusty Esom T05 brush and go into Clove, and I'll stamp this along my upper and lower lash lines. Let me curl my eyelashes and throw on a bit of mascara, and I'll be right back. All right, all done. I will list everything that I have on my face down below in my description box if you're interested, but let's go ahead and jump into the comparison swatches. So I decided to compare this Sunrise palette to the Warm and Rose edit palettes from Viseart at the same time, because I felt like if you combine those two palettes from Viseart, you got a very, very similar look and feel to this palette. And then I also did the same thing with the Natasha Denona Lila and Sunset palettes, where I know she's talked about how this is kind of an extension to the Sunset palette, but I feel like the same with those two Viseart palettes. If you combine the Sunset and the Lila palettes, you kind of got a similar look and feel to this Sunrise palette. So let's start with the Sunrise versus the Viseart palettes. So what I did for these comparison swatches is I went row by row in the Sunrise palette, and then I just compared it to either the Warm or the Rose edit palette. If I found anything that was similar in here, I swatched it right next to it. So I have the Sunrise swatch first, and then I have the Viseart swatches after. But I'm going to go ahead and actually talk through these swatches because it may end up being a little bit confusing. So first, here's just an overhead shot of the three palettes next to one another, just so you can see how similar the color stories are if you were to combine the Warm and the Rose together. I do feel like you would kind of pop out a Sunrise palette. So here is the first row of the Sunrise palette compared to the two Viseart palettes. So first we have Poppy from the Sunrise palette, and I have that swatched next to Mars from the Warm edit palette, and then Rosé from the Rosé palette. And then next we have Citrine from the Sunrise palette, and I have that compared to Saffron in the Warm edit palette. Next we have Phlox from the Sunrise palette, and next to that I have Rosé again from the Rosé Viseart palette. And then I didn't find anything similar to Awakening from Sunrise, so the next swatch is Laurel, which is the last color in the top row of Sunrise. And I have that swatch next to the Splendor shade from the Rosé edit palette. So out of all of these swatches, I want to say Citrine and Saffron are probably the most similar. The others have a very similar feel, but as you can see, they're not dead on. I feel like the tones in each are just a little bit off. All right, here is the second row of the Sunrise palette. So we start with Aster from the Sunrise palette, and that is swatched next to Wisteria in the Rosé palette. That obviously is very, very different. The Wisteria is much cooler, much lighter, much more of a lilac color. And then we have Glory from Sunrise, and I have that swatch next to the Rosette shade from the Rosé palette. And next is Azalea, and I have that swatch next to the Bronzed Peach shade from the Warm palette. And then we have Morgan, which is a matte shade from the Sunrise palette, and I have that swatch next to the Peony shade from the Rosé palette. And then last we have Agate from the Sunrise palette, and next to that I have swatched the Moonstone shade from the Warm palette, and then the Splendor shade from the Rosé palette. So here I feel like we have some more similar shades. I feel like the matte shades are very, very close. The Glory shade is probably a little bit warmer than the Rosette shade from the Rosé palette. The Rosette shade has a little bit more of a purpley base to it, but they're very similar. And then the Morgan shade is very, very similar to the Peony. That's almost like a dead-on dupe. And then the Azalea compared to the Bronze Peach, they're different, but again, very, very similar. You're going to get a very, very similar look on the lid. And then the other two shades you can see are fairly different from the closest that I could find. So here in the last row of the Sunrise palette, I could only find two shades that had similarities to the Viseart palettes. So the first one is Jasper, which is a matte orange, and I have that compared to the Flame matte shade from the Warm edit palette. And then I have Day Spring, which is a metallic shade from the Sunrise palette, and I have that compared to Burnt Gold from the Warm edit palette. And then next to that is Splendor from the Rosé palette. So I think Flame and Jasper are very, very similar. Jasper is probably a little bit more red, Flame's a little bit more orange. And for Day Spring, I feel like Day Spring falls right in between Burnt Gold and Splendor. And next, what I have done is basically the same thing, but with the Sunset and the Lila palettes, because like I had mentioned before, I feel like if you combined those two palettes, you would kind of spit out this Sunrise palette, much like the Warm and Rosé Viseart palettes. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing. So first we have Poppy from the Sunrise palette, and that is next to Pure from the Lila palette. And then we have Citrine from the Sunrise palette, and that is swatched next to Soul from the Sunset palette. And then next we have Phlox from the Sunrise palette, and I have that swatched next to Cyclone from the Lila palette. And then we have Awakening from Sunrise compared to Helio from the Lila palette. And the last shade in that row, Laurel, I did not find anything close in either the Lila or the Sunset palettes. So here I don't really see anything that's like an exact dupe. That's pretty much to be expected since all of the shades in the Sunrise palette are brand new. The closest I would say is probably the Citrine and the Soul. The Citrine I find to be just a hint deeper, and I actually like the Citrine on my lids a little bit more than the Soul. The Soul is a little bit more of, I don't know, it's just a little bit more pastel-y than the Citrine. And then here's the second row. So I start with Azalea from the Sunrise palette, and I compare that to Cyclone, again, from the Lila palette. And then next I have Agate from the Sunrise palette, and I have that swatched next to Sundazed from the Sunset palette. Now these were the only two shades that I found in this second row of the Sunrise palette where I could find something similar in these other two Natasha Denona palettes. Aster, Glory, and Morgan, just nothing was close. I really thought when I looked at Aster that I would find probably a couple dupes in the Lila palette, but that is definitely not the case. The Aster shade is much lighter than any of the other kind of similar purpley tones in the Lila palette. And then here is the final row of Sunrise. So first we have Clove, and I have that swatched next to Amara from the Lila palette. Next to that I have Jasper from the Sunrise palette, and that is swatched next to Sinai, and then Horizon, both from the Sunset palette. And then finally I have Dayspring from Sunrise, and I have that swatch next to Bronze Age from the Sunset palette. This row, I felt like these shades were pretty close. The Clove and the Amara are very, very close. I find the Amara to be a little bit more brown and the Clove to be a little bit more red. And as for Jasper, that is much brighter than both of the oranges from the Sunset palette, but kind of close, kind of close. And then Dayspring is actually very similar to Bronze Age. All right, so those were all of my comparison swatches. I hope you enjoyed those. I hope you found that helpful. I do feel like if you got both the Warm and the Rosé edit palettes from Viseart, it would be fairly similar. You would have a very similar color story. You would probably end up creating very similar eye looks, but I will say the formulas are quite different. Viseart, I feel like, is a little bit more beginner friendly. Their shadows are a little bit more straightforward. The Natasha Denona, especially her matte shadows, I mean, I think they work beautifully. I think they blend out beautifully, but because they are a little bit thicker in texture, I find sometimes it just takes a little bit longer to blend. I definitely found less similarities between this and the Sunset and Lila palettes placed together versus the Warm and the Rosé edit palettes from Viseart, probably because all of these shades are brand new. So that kind of makes sense to me. But I really like this palette, and if you guys want like a 3 looks 1 palette, I would love to do that actually, because when I take a look at this palette, I do actually see like a lot of different directions that you can go in. You can do like a very soft peachy look like I did, inspired by Natasha Denona. You can do something really bright with that citrine and the carnelian. You could do something like really red toned with these shades in here. I just feel like I see a lot of different like directions that you can go in. So if you guys want something like that, definitely love to do that for you. I'm not traveling for a while, so I'll have the time to do that. Just let me know down below in the comment section. I do want to mention though, and I wanted to spend a little bit more time with these shadows, but I find the matte shadows in this palette to be superb. I have always enjoyed Natasha Denona matte shadows. I've had luck, like in her Tropic palette, those matte shadows in the first, the top 2 rows, I love. They're absolutely gorgeous. The matte shadows in Lila and Sunset, I love them all. In Gold and in Safari, her all matte palette, I love her matte shadows. But the matte shadows in here are really out of this world. They are all incredibly pigmented, incredibly creamy, but really, really smooth too. Like what I was just saying with Natasha Denona shadows in general with mattes, like they can be so creamy that it can be, that it can take like a little bit of work to kind of blend them out. I didn't really find that with these. I thought that these blended really easily. They're almost like a little bit less creamy and a little bit more powdery. So I find that they blend more quickly. So anyway, I'm really enjoying this palette. I highly recommend this palette if you are interested in it. And let me know what you think if you purchase this palette down below in the comments section. I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't purchased this yet and you have some questions, of course, leave them down in the comments section as well. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe down below if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video.